morning.
Good morning.
Oh, man.
It'll be okay. That's what I tell them. It'll be okay.
Alex, how'd y'all's Bible study go? Yes. And we held that Friday night. She went straight down Saturday night. Put a stop to that and write these.
Yeah. Let's
Exactly.
I know he's got his own struggle.
That's top-rated kids in your guys, so you need to sleep in the same room. Then when the day comes where they don't sleep in the same room, like, it's gonna be hard on them. Whenever, yes, I think we're not gonna leave the house.
It is, Alex. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
By that time, maybe that was hoping it would be different.
All right, folks, let's get started in our study of Genesis, really the main characters from the book of Genesis. We have introduced the book, and we spent time last week studying about Adam. And we're going to move on into Eve this morning. Before we do, I wanted to just finish up some thoughts that I had about Adam that we really didn't get the opportunity to go through. And if we did, it felt a little rushed. I want to spend a little bit more time. We had talked about the comparisons and the contrast between Adam and Jesus. And in the book of Romans, chapter 5, verses 12 through 21, is this wonderful section that Paul writes, really helping us to see that sin is something that all mankind has had to deal with from the very beginning of time. And that's important to the book of Romans. I'm trying to give you some context here before we just look at the passage. It's important to the book of Romans because the whole premise is he's trying to take this church who is fighting amongst themselves. They're a little bit divided, mainly because they are a mix-up of both Jews and Gentiles. And his beginning has been that Jews are guilty of sin, Gentiles are guilty of sin, all people are guilty of sin. That's getting us all the way up to chapter 3. Chapter 4, he talks about Abraham and that there was justification. The heading is on my Bible, justification by faith, evidence in the Old Testament, specifically how Abraham was justified he was found righteous in the eyes of God through his faith. And then he talks about the results of that justification. Verse 12, he says this, and I want to just read the entirety of verse 12 through 21. It says, "Therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, so death spread to all men because all sinned." That should go ring-a-ding-a-dingy in your mind to go back to chapter 3, verse 23, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." He says, verse 13, "For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam until Moses." So right there he defines this one man that he mentioned in verse 12, how sin entered into the world. He says, "Death reigned from Adam until Moses, even over those who had not sinned in the likeness of the offense of Adam, who is a type of him who was to come." So verse 14, he says, sin existed from Adam until Moses. Now that's not saying that sin stopped with Moses. Sin continued on. But he's making the case here that even if the law was given, that doesn't get rid of sin. If anything, it's going to actually reveal sin a little bit more. Now, because we have not just a moral code that people live by and a law that's passed down through patriarchs, they can go to the 10 Commandments and see the rules, the commands that God has given, and see where they have messed up. Okay? So sin continues on. But he says this, even over those who had not sinned in the same way that Adam sinned, there's still sin, even if you didn't do it exactly the way Adam did. Verse 15, he says, "But the free gift is not like the transgression, for if by the transgression of the one the many died, much more did the grace of God and the gift by the grace of the one man, Jesus Christ, abound to the many." And so he says, verse 14, remember what he says here. He said, who is a type, he's talking about Adam, who is a type of him who was to come. He's saying that Adam is in the likeness of Jesus. But it's a different kind of likeness because it's not the same thing. There's a contrast here. And he defines that contrast in verse 15, saying that as much as Adam brought out death, there's grace through the one man, Jesus Christ, to many. Verse 16, "The gift is not like that which came through the one who sinned. For on the one hand, the judgment arose from the transgression, resulting in condemnation. But on the other hand," this is the comparison, "the free gift arose from many transgressions, resulting in justification." He goes on to say, "For if by the transgression of the one, Adam, death reigned through the one, much more those who receive the abundance of grace and the gift of righteousness will reign in the life of the one, Jesus Christ." You see the comparison he's making? Should be obvious to us. Plus, I've got a cheat sheet right up here on the board. "So then," verse 18, as through one transgression there resulted in condemnation to all men, even so through one act of righteousness there resulted justification of life to all men. For as through the one man's disobedience the many were made sinners, even so through the obedience of the one many will be made righteous. Key verse right there. He says the law came in so that the transgressions would increase. It's more defined. We can read from the 10 Commandments exactly what God is expecting of us. And therefore, it's more revealed to man what sin is. Therefore, it increases, right? He says that if that's the case, grace abounded all the more. Sometimes we think that God's not gracious in the Old Testament. This is contrary to that, saying that as much as the sin is defined by the law, God is even more gracious. How is that the case? He's still in his plan is going to provide the one man who's going to bring grace to everybody. Verse 21, so that as sin reigned in death, even so grace would reign through the righteousness to eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So, it's a comparison between the two, Adam and Jesus. And in the chart, it really helps us define it even further. How sin and death entered the world through Adam, but Jesus brings life. Through Adam, we have condemnation. Sin is introduced to everybody, and therefore we're going to have to deal with the consequences of sin. But in the same way that we all are going to fall short of the glory of God, Jesus provides justification for everyone. And as much as Adam was disobedient, Jesus is obedient. And so I just think that's a really good comparison to help us to see what he's teaching right here in the book of Romans. So we're doing this character study of people from the book of Genesis, but you have already found that we're going to be all over the Bible reading these beautiful passages that expound upon what we learned from these characters. We're going to be able to do that with Noah and with Abraham and a lot of other ones that are throughout the book of Genesis. This morning, we're going to continue on. Any comments about Adam as we're going to close that chapter up? Anything at all that people would like to contribute to the conversation? Anything? Are y'all awake this morning? No? I see a lot of green out there. That's good, because I'm going to pinch the fire out of anybody that's not wearing green. No, I'm kidding you. Rachel helped me pick up my outfit today. All right. Let's go on and study Eve. Now, you may be thinking, well, if we've studied Adam, surely we've already talked about everything that we could talk about with Eve, but yet there is still more. Now, some of it certainly is going to overlap, but I think it'll be a good study for us this morning as we get into this. All right? Let's just talk a little bit about why can't I say this word? Biography. Gosh, I'm looking at it like I'm an idiot and I can't say that word. Biography. All right. So I want to do that with each one of the characters. We've done that with Adam, and so it's good to just kind of look at this personal data right here as well. The name Eve. You may already know this, but the name Eve literally just means life or life-giving. Living is a good way of looking at it. Chapter 3, verse 20, it says, now the man called his wife Eve because she was the mother of all the living. Isn't that interesting to think about? I remember even as a kid thinking how all of mankind has come from this one couple. I love the idea behind that. Now, it's interesting, too, to think about how, sure, if you traced it all the way back, you get to Noah and his 3 sons. God destroyed everybody except his family. But you can go back even further and see, that everybody comes from this couple. She is the mother of all the living. Without Eve, we would not be. That's just the way God had designed it. I think it's interesting as well that when you read about the genealogy of Jesus from Luke's account, he takes you all the way back to Adam. Isn't that interesting to think about? He traces it all the way back. You all know that the Jews were just excellent record keepers. And so Luke, in his genius way of writing and giving us every single detail, does trace Jesus' lineage all the way back to Adam. And of course, back to Eve as well. Without Eve, there would not have been other sons. Her husband is Adam. We've talked about this already. But they have 3 sons, Cain, Abel, and Seth, which we've already looked at this. Just to remind you here, verse 1 and 2 of chapter 4. Now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And she said, now listen to she is the one, Eve is the one that names this son of hers, Cain. I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. Now, we know the story behind how that all came to be. One of the consequences of her sin, which we'll see in a little bit, is that she's going to have pain increased during childbirth. But here in chapter 4, verse 1, we see that she's the one that says, I'm going to name him Cain because I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. That word man-child, it makes me think of the movie when I was a kid, The Jungle Book. They would call Mowgli a man-child, you know. Cain is called a man-child here by Eve with the help of the Lord. And then it says, verse 2, and she gave birth to his brother Abel. And then it gives some more details. Abel was a keeper of the flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. We also see, I think it's verse 25 of the same chapter. Yes. Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. For she said, remember, she's the one that's naming these children right here. She said, God has appointed me another offspring in the place of Abel, for Cain killed him. And so she's the one that named Seth. The name Seth actually is an interesting name. It means like a consolation. You know, it's a replacement, and that's what that's what she's saying right here. God has appointed me another offspring in the place of. So it's like I've lost this one, but here's another one, and what a blessing that has been. All right. So these are her three sons. Let's talk a little bit more about before the fall. Eve had been created by God in the same way that Adam originates from the creation of God. Eve is also from God, but different because obviously she is taken from a rib, whereas Adam was formed from the dirt of the ground. But if you were to trace the origin of Adam's rib, it goes back to the dirt. So Eve is just as much dirty as Adam is. Comes from the same thing, right? But she's been created by God. Chapter 1, verse 26, God said, let us make man in our image. And this is important. The word man right here is not let us make males in our image, but it is the word for mankind. Okay, so that includes both genders. Let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let us, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. For God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. And so here we see that she is created in the same way, the same breath that God is creating Adam, God is creating Eve. Chapter 2, verse 18 through 23. Eve is created for a specific purpose. The Lord God said, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him. A helper suitable for him. Out of the ground, God formed every beast and everything. Verse 19. The man names all the animals. Verse 21. The Lord caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept, and he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in that place. The Lord God fashioned into a woman the rib which he had taken from the man and brought her to the man. Now, my New American Standard Version here makes that sentence wonky in my mind. Okay? It's just weird. Does anybody have anything different than what I just read in verse 22?
King James says, and the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, made he a woman and brought
Yeah.
her into the man.
That's way better. That's better. My version makes it sound like he took a woman and made a rib. You know? But we know that that's different. But it's just that my version is so literal in the way that it translates that it keeps it in the same syntax. But it really needs to switch around right there because we know the course of events. Context gives it more than what the words are, and that should have been taken into account when they translated that. So, she is formed from this rib, is who she is. Let's see, got 22. So man was made last of all the creation. Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever noticed that when God creates everything, he sporadically will say, this is good. I've created this and this is good. But it's not until he sits back and he looks after creating man that he says, this is very good. Very good. What makes it very good is that man now is a part of this creation that God has made. Man was made the last, and it's the best and the most excellent of all the created things. And since Eve was made after and out of Anne, woman was made the crowning glory of man. The crowning glory of man. Matthew Henry's commentaries. Anybody know Matthew? Anybody read any Matthew Henry commentary stuff? It's good stuff. Old stuff. But in Matthew Henry's commentary, here's what he says. He says, that the woman was made of a rib out of the side of Adam, not made out of his head, to top him, not out of his feet, to be trampled upon by him, but out of his side, to be equal with him, under his arm, to be protected, and near his heart, to be beloved. I've heard this somewhat quoted in wedding ceremonies. Have you heard that? But I had not read the entire quote from Matthew Henry until studying for this passage. And I like this furtherance of what I've always heard. You know, he didn't take it from the head so that she would be over him, or nor the feet to be trampled, but from the side to be along with him. But I love this part right here. Under his arm to be protected. I love that idea. You know, I feel like that is a natural thing that a husband should have for his wife, to protect her. And so that kind of brings that to light. And then also near his heart to be beloved. You know, that's a good little commentary, a good quote right there for us to understand this. So she is to be a helper, compatible to him. I think the King James does say helpmeet in verse 18 of chapter 2. Is that what it says? A helpmeet?
Yes.
Okay. So a helpmeet. So she is to be somebody that is meeting the needs to help him accomplish the responsibilities of man. And I can understand that. You know, in my own personal life, I need all the help I can get. And I really don't like to do the things that I'm responsible for, even in my own home, without the help of Kira. All right? I know this. Right now, she's actually, she may be tuning in right now. Hi there. She's with her parents, helping them get some things done. They're trying to pack up and move, and so she's up there this weekend. And you know, I have responsibilities. I have kids. They're hungry. They're thirsty. You know, you have to feed them. You take care of them. There's responsibilities at home. Still have to do those things. And when she's not there, it's not as easy. She's coming home this afternoon. I look forward to have somebody that's going to help me. It's not all on me. Sometimes when I'm home and I don't have her, I'm unmotivated. Am I the only one that feels this way? Maybe I am. I'm unmotivated to do things. But when she's there, let's get this work done. Let's do these things that we're responsible for. Maybe that goes all the way back to the creation. It's not good for Adam to be alone. It's not good for Alex to be alone. I need a helpmeet. I need somebody that's right there that carries out the responsibilities with me. Kira and I, we like to do things together. I don't know. There's hardly a thing that we do. We just don't do it together. I mean, like anything and everything, hard construction projects that we do, whatever. She's going to put everything into it and help me. She has been under the mower before, helping me change blades on a mower, just anything, but not just, and sometimes I just need her there for the moral support, just to help me, coach me through. And so if things go wrong and I get mad because something won't come loose, I don't throw the wrench somewhere, That's the helpmeet that I need. That's me personally. That's not that way in every marriage, but your spouse may help you in certain ways, and that's good too. That's really good. All right, so she was to live with her husband, and they lived in a state of innocence. This is something we talked about before when we were talking about Adam. Remind you of this verse, chapter 2, verse 25. That the man and his wife were both naked and they were not ashamed. That's just innocence. They have nothing to be ashamed about. So they're living in this wonderful situation where they're vulnerable, but they don't feel that way. They're naked and not afraid is the best way to look at it. All right, so she also had certain God-given responsibilities in the same way that Adam did. She was to be a good wife to her husband. Verse 18 it tells us that when we've already talked about it, as a helper that's suitable to him. A good wife. She was to be one with him. Verse 23 and 24. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." One flesh. Anytime that I'm giving marriage counseling or premarital counseling, I like to mention how important, because a lot of times when people are seeking counsel, if they've been married, usually premarital counseling is a lot different than you've been married 10 years and you're struggling through some things. But if they're coming to me after so many years and needing some counseling, there's usually a problem. Nobody seeks out marriage counseling when things are going great, right? They're going to seek it out when there's struggles, So I love to point out that the husband and wife are to be one flesh in every aspect of their lives. Every aspect. There's not one spot where you say, you know what, that's my life, that's your life. From where you live, decisions that you make, down to your finances, you need to be unified. How you parent, unified. Religiously, you need to be equally yoked. You need to have the same goals in mind and set those goals together. When you become one flesh, it's not just they live together, they're married. It's not just a sexual thing either. It certainly is. They become one flesh. It's a God-given benefit of marriage. But it's in every aspect, and that's what she was to be. A good wife to her husband. Help him out with the task that God has given to him to subdue the earth. This is back over to verse 28 of chapter 1. Notice these responsibilities that they're given in verse 28. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." These are commands to Adam and Eve. This is what you're supposed to go and do. Subdue it, rule over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the sky, and over everything that moves on the earth. So she was to help him do those very things. And she was to obey, let me go back here. She was to obey all the commands of God as well. Chapter 2, verse 16 and 17. The Lord commanded the man, saying, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it you will surely die. That command is to both Adam and Eve. They're there in the garden, and that was what they were supposed to have done. So that's their responsibilities that they have as they live their lives. All right? Any questions or comments? Anybody want to add anything about Eve so far? We're going to get into the fall. This is the main part of Eve. It's an interesting part for sure. Anything else you want to mention?
I think it's interesting in 2 and 24, when God joined the man and woman together, Moses added, leave your father and mother,
Yeah.
which they didn't have a father and mother.
Right.
But
Yeah, he's
not like it's an afterthought, but
yeah.
it's like Moses said, oh, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting. You have to think of it from that perspective, because Adam and Eve, you're right, they don't have a father and mother. But he's setting a precedence of how it should be from then on.
Yeah.
Right? Good point to bring up. Okay, let's talk about the fall. We're going to go to chapter 3, verses 1 through 6 to begin with. We can read it and then we'll just kind of cover this real quick. It says, now the serpent was more crafty than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, indeed, has God said, you shall not eat from any tree of the garden? The woman said to the serpent, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat. But from the fruit of the tree which is in the middle of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat from it or touch it, or you will die. The serpent said to the woman, you surely will not die. For God knows that in the day that you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. When the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was desirable to make one wise, she took from its fruit and ate, and she gave also to her husband with her, and he ate. So what do we find here? First of all, Eve is tempted by Satan. This is the whole dialogue here through verses 1 through 5. Satan appears to her in the form of a serpent. It's just interesting, you know. I think that this is my opinion. This is Alex's opinion. I think maybe one of the reasons that man has a natural fear of serpents, of snakes, is because that's the first way that we see that the devil presented himself to man. Maybe it's just ingrained in our head. I need to stay away from that kind of a beast. I hate snakes. I hate them. I'm not afraid of all of them, but I'm afraid of most of them. We had a snake. I saw a snake the other day in my garden, a little striped garter snake. Doesn't bother me, but I will not touch it. I'm not going to pick it up. I don't like it. I'll keep my distance. I just don't like them. They're creepy to me, and I don't like it. You never know where they're going to go, because they can be there and facing that way, but then they go that way. I don't want to put up with that. A few years ago, here at North Heights, I hope I've told y'all this. Here at North Heights, we were getting ready for Vacation Bible School, and Jesse and I were back here We lifted this thing up. We needed some spare lumber that we were needing to build this thing. And a rattlesnake was underneath this thing. And I knew something had to be done because we were going to have all these people up here. I think it's illegal in the state of Arkansas to kill a rattlesnake. I think it's illegal to kill any snake. Is that right?
Yeah, if it's in danger, if it's like in your space and is causing a threat, then you can kill it.
I was threatened. Lock me up for all I care when it comes to that. So
After those screams.
I had Jesse run, and he got this little hoe thing out of the bus barn, and I got up there and I just and chopped its head, but it didn't go all the way through it. Of course, then it got really mad. I've got a video of this. I need to show y'all sometime.
Wait a minute, at what point did Jesse run?
I'll let him answer that. But anyway, I hate it. The point to this is I stabbed this snake, and so much adrenaline was going through my body that I literally am shaking like this. I could feel it, and even the video, you could see it, just me shaking like this. And I remember thinking, this is the preacher going up against Satan right here in the middle of all this. I just don't like them. So,
Get him out of there.
what's that?
How'd you get him out of there?
I killed him. Chopped his head completely off. Yeah, then I had Sean come, because I'm not going to touch any snake. And I asked Sean to cut off the rattle, and I still got it. Still creeps me out. But anyway, it was about that long, and about that big around. But it was not for good at all. There's a natural fear to this, and I think it does stem right down here to this right here. So Satan appears in the form of a serpent. Notice what he does. He questions what God has said. He says, "You shall not." Has God said, "You shall not eat from any tree of the garden"? Now, what a slick thing to say. The answer. Listen. The answer is obvious. And so the woman answers and says, "Well, from the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but there's this one tree in the middle of the garden that God says we shouldn't eat it or touch it or we'll die." And the serpent said to the woman, "You shall not die." Here's the neat thing about Satan's approach right here is, in some sense, in every lie there is a nugget of truth. Here, there's a nugget of truth to this. She will not, and Adam and Eve will not immediately die if they eat from that tree. We see that because that's exactly, they didn't kill over right then as soon as they ate it. So, did they die when they ate this? Not immediately. I think that once they started to eat from it, that the process began of physical death. The consequence is that they're cast out of the garden and they don't have access to the tree of life anymore. Therefore, their process of dying begins physically. Spiritually speaking, immediately when they disobeyed God, they died. They begin to die. They separate themselves from God spiritually. So it's a huge lie with just a nugget of truth. He says, "For God knows that in that day you'll eat from it and your eyes will be opened." And it is true. In some sense, their eyes were opened because they were not ashamed, and then they began to be ashamed and felt guilt. And he says, "You will be like God, knowing good and evil." Huge lie right there. Adam and Eve already know what good and evil is. They already know it. They know it from the perspective of being in a good relationship with God and knowing good. They know what is good because they have this relationship with God. And so they already knew it. And so it's not even something that should have tempted her. But Satan, he doesn't work. He's not playing by the rules here. He's given something that he really can't even give. And so what does the woman do? She eats from it. She ate and gave to her husband. John 8:44, Jesus describes Satan as the father of lies. The father of lies. That's what his whole job is, to deceive and to lie. All right, let's keep going here just a little bit. Her response is found in verse 6. She's deceived, and because of that, she sins. She saw that the fruit was good for food. Everybody's always speculated, what is this fruit? Who knows? All the artwork that we've seen depicts it as a juicy red apple. May have been more like I've heard it been said, maybe more like a pomegranate. Maybe. I don't know. It doesn't matter what it is. But she saw that it looked good. And she says that it was desirable, and it would be make one wise. Satan says that. That's a typo up there. And so she ate, and then she gave to her husband for him to eat. Some people will say, and I've heard it my whole life, I guess, that Eve is at fault here. She's the first one to have sinned. I think I could make the argument that Adam was the first one to have sinned, in that he was not leading his household in the spiritual way that he should have been leading his household, enough to where Satan is presenting himself and tempting her. And if the man was leading in the way that he should have, maybe she wouldn't have fell to that temptation. Now, that's a lot of speculation. And we know, the plan of God, it all was carried out exactly the way God intended. But it doesn't even matter. I hate the blame game of, oh, look, it's Eve's fault. She sinned first. And if Eve wouldn't have done that. Have you heard, did you tell me the joke last week about, tell the joke about that.
It's a meme. It says why women won't choose where to eat, because
Yeah.
the first time they did, they doomed humanity.
Yeah, that's right. It's a funny joke, but listen, mankind is guilty, and that's what's happening right here. They're both guilty, just as much. And it doesn't matter who did things first. If she wouldn't have done it, he would have done it eventually as well. The consequence is simple. She lost her innocence, the same as Adam here. It was shameful. She had a fear of God. She had the realization of her actions. I'm sorry, that's not realization. That's rationalization. There's a typo there too, of her actions. Another consequence is increased pain in childbirth. She is to be subject to her husband, and she's driven from the garden. Death is going to happen, and no longer access to the tree of life. But also we see this beautiful idea of a promise of the Redeemer in verse 15, chapter 3. Look what it says. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. This is the consequence that God has given to Satan. There is going to be strife between mankind, because he says the woman and your seed, mankind, he will bruise you on the, he shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. The idea here is that between Jesus and Satan, Satan is getting the death blow to the head. And all that Jesus has to deal with is a flesh wound to the heel that's not necessarily deadly. Even though Jesus dies on the cross, he raises up to live again. It's not a death blow, but Satan is crushed. Satan is condemned. And that's a prelude to all of that. She gives birth, family is she gives birth to 3 sons. We've talked about this already. Not going to go over any of that. Oh, that's so good stuff. The plan for marriage in the home is man has a need and God created woman to fulfill that need. Adam and Eve become husband and wife, and it's God's intent. It has always been that there would be one man and one woman in one life together. All right, there are some other comparisons I wanted to give, but maybe I'll just pick up with that next week and just kind of show you some of that stuff. Look, see perfectly. Yeah, I'll show you these cool charts that make some comparisons next week, okay? But then here's what I want you to do. We're going to be studying Noah. We're going to go into Noah. So I would ask that you read all the way up to Genesis chapter 9. Okay, read into chapter 9, maybe even into 10. Just read all the way up through that. So if you wanted to start like chapter 6, you don't have to read chapter 5. It's just the generations of Adam. And then go all the way down to chapter 9 for sure. And even into 10, I think that'd be good. All right? So 6 through 10 between now and next week. Thank y'all so much.
Mine has a footnote for Cain that says to get.